One of Nathaniel Hawthorne's best short stories is one of his earliest, Young Goodman Brown, first published in a magazine in 1835, later reprinted in the collection Mosses from an Old Manse in 1846. Melville, Hawthorne's good friend and admirer, wrote that, in a review of that book, wrote that these stories show Hawthorne's particular darkness, quote, shrouded in blackness 10 times black. That blackness is particularly acute here. Set in Salem during the era of the Salem witch trials, in which Hawthorne's ancestors were participants, judges. The heritage of guilt drenches pretty much everything that Hawthorne wrote. Particularly, I would say, the Scarlet Letter, obviously, but this one story as well, in particular. The opening sentence, beginnings and endings, the opening sentence highlights hesitancy as the titular hero heads forth into the night, but pauses in seeming uncertainty. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street at Salem Village, but put his head back after crossing the threshold to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife. The wife is named Faith, setting up a dynamic where Goodman Brown is leaving Faith behind to enter the material world of the street at Salem Village. But it's also a scene where the hero is leaving his material domestic surroundings to enter a more mysterious setting of the night. These dual possibilities are emphasized by the superficially allegorical name Faith, which encourages doubling in any interpretation. Faith's first act is a parting kiss, a sign of embrace and of division, and then she, quote, thrusts her own pretty head into the street, which marks a penetrative intrusion into something pure, into something pure, into something common. We're also told that by doing so, she was, quote, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap, which, coming so early in the story and so soon after that adjective pretty, begins to paint her as vaguely frivolous and vain, two things that are not generally smiled upon, let's say, in Puritan culture. But we're not sure at this point. We're still just grappling. We're just a couple of sentences in. What do we do with all of this information? The whole first paragraph induces in us a feeling of ambiguity, uncertainty. Are the characters good or evil? Are their actions right or wrong? In these first few lines, when readers are struggling for bearings on the basic questions of storytelling, like, who do I root for? The text itself is pretty opaque. You don't know what to make of anything. You're looking for signs, but they're inconclusive. As readers, we're put in the essential quandary of those 17th century Puritans, desperate to see the intelligible meaning in life, the evidence of divine order in the material world. Now, this sensibility is exploited further in the coy seduction of foreshadowing. Faith is worried about what her husband might do, quote, of all nights of the year. Brown hints obliquely at such an errand and about what work is to be done tonight. Here, the illicit mystery tantalizes, teases, which is what good storytelling does. It draws in readers and makes them want to keep reading, but that curiosity has a dark aspect. Ask Adam and Eve. Readers are drawn into a possibility of sin, of something unnatural, something hidden, forbidden even. So readers are further implicated in struggling to understand the signs at play in this world. They find themselves vulnerable to the promise of meaning if they only pursue their curiosity. Instead of being passive observers in this world of rigid Puritan moralism, we're all drawn into the drama as protagonists. This is the core function of allegory, but unlike the schoolroom allegories of the past, like Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and thousands of lesser imitators, here the signifiers are ambiguous. We don't know if faith or the good man are to be trusted. All the anchors of that representative mode are loose, and we have to struggle with that. Now, also notable are the incomparable atmospherics. Hawthorne can set a mood with writing that absolutely shakes you. With this excellent resolve for the future, Goodman Brown felt himself justifying in making haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road, darkened by all the gloomiest trees in the forest, which barely stood aside to let the narrow path creep through, and closed immediately behind. It was all as lonely as could be, and there is this peculiarity in such a solitude, that the traveler knows not who may be concealed by the innumerable trunks and the thick boughs overhead, so that with lonely footsteps he may yet be passing through an unseen multitude. Ooh. This language is immersive, dreary, dark, and gloomiest creep. The repetition drills home this character's isolation, tolling the word lonely, solitude, and then lonely again. The dread is palpable, signaling that the setting is changed. The confident positivism of that first sentence of this paragraph dissolves immediately into the eeriness of that moment when the character leaves the town and is suddenly surrounded by wilderness. The Baroque fullness of the language, however, also has a kind of seduction, whispering the sensual pleasure of this story to a culture that distrusts pleasure of any kind. Now, Brown meets a man in the woods. Interestingly, it is first, quote, the figure of a man. The figure of, figurative, figural. Underlining the figural or allegorical quality of this character. He's associated with nature by being, quote, seated at the foot of an old tree. His identification with infernal spirits is locked in with references to passing through central Boston just 15 minutes earlier. On a good day with no traffic, it'd take at least 45 minutes to drive. So you get a sense that, okay, this is unnatural. Brown blames his wife for his tardiness. Who doesn't do that? Saying, faith kept me back for a while. Now, the allegorical double meaning here is obvious, but also shifts us back into alignment with faith. If we need to distinguish characters in terms of opposites, faith was first opposed to Brown, and so readers might be more inclined to side with Brown. But now faith is opposed to this dark figure who explicitly suggests demonic origin. And so we swing back into the wife's camp. This, of course, is the simple binary thought process that Puritans anchored their belief in: good and evil, the saved and the damned, us versus them. But by shifting our personal allegiances from one character or another based on these categorical essences, we are now all Puritans with them. Now, Brown claims hesitancy in this errand, to which the dark man encourages them to keep walking as they talk, reasoning as they go, which spotlights the potential demonic nature of reason. Curious. Brown objects that associating with this figure is shameful and a disgrace to his honorable family. The dark man counters with, I have been as well acquainted with your family as with ever a one among the Puritans, and that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather, the constable, when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly through the streets of Salem, and it was I that brought your father a pitch pine knot, kindled at my own hearth to set fire to an Indian village in King Philip's war. They were my good friends both, and many a pleasant walk have we had along this path, and returned merrily after midnight. I would fain be friends with you for their sake. Now, this undercuts the confidence of family honor. Brown's lineage and the whole Puritan community drips with the blood of past sin. Notable here is the identity of the victims, a woman in a Native American village, signaling the story's consciousness of those persecutions as a sinful rather than a rationalization of patriarchy or manifest destiny. The complicity of Brown's family is used by the dark man to shame him into continuing along wherever this symbolic and physical dark path leads. Brown recognizes several figures headed along the same path. A pious old woman from the village, of whom he says, "That old woman taught me my catechism," said the young man. And there was a world of meaning in this simple comment. The text encouraging us all to read and interpret and ferret out multiple meanings in everything. He also recognizes the local minister and deacon and several familiar voices. Once the listener fancied that he could distinguish the accents of townspeople of his own, men and women, both pious and ungodly, many of whom he had met with at the communion table and had seen others rioting in the tavern. Pretty broad swath of the community right there, I'm sure. Among these, he hears the voice of, quote, a young woman. At this, Brown exclaims, "Faith!" shouted Goodman Brown, in the voice of agony and desperation, and the echoes of the forest mocked him, crying, "Faith! Faith!" as if bewildered wretches were seeking her all through the wilderness. But at this point, we don't know what faith he means. Is it his wife, linking her with the figure of the young woman, or is it faith as an expostulation, like crying, "Oh God"? Is he just crying out for divine help in a moment of crisis? Either way, the immediate consequence is an echo, a repetition of the word reflected back at him from nature itself. The sign is only defined by another sign, which refers back to the original in a tautological loop. And it's only a rhetorical trick that gives any exterior meaning that points back to the person itself. The text says the echo sounds, quote, as if bewildered wretches were seeking her. As if. As if. That's a rhetorical mechanism right there. Literature. This story is about reading. So we readers don't know if Brown actually sees his wife among the insidious crowd or not. We're told that Brown is lost in a kind of noisy tumult. And then he sees, quote, something fluttered lightly down through the air and caught on the branch of a tree. The young man seized it and beheld a pink ribbon. He doesn't see his wife. He sees that conspicuous pink ribbon, which some might call circumstantial evidence, and others might call a metonymy, the representation of a whole by one of its parts. But it is expressly not Faith, the person herself. It's a symbol that needs interpretation, a hint of meaning with nothing definite behind it. Brown cries out, "My faith is gone!" cried he, after one stupefied moment. "There is no good on earth, and sin is but a name. Come, devil, for to thee the world is given." Once again, is he talking about his wife or his religious belief? Faith here can mean either. And that odd phrasing, sin is but a name? The name is an outward representation of a thing. If sin is nothing more than that, then all piety and impiety is relativistic. All so-called faith is undermined, and the entire belief system crumbles, which Brown admits when he cries out that the devil, who may or may not be the dark figure who led Brown here, has dominion on earth. Brown finds himself in the middle of a vast coven, in the middle of the forest. Hellish sounds swirl. Sight is obscured and opaque. We're told even the paragons of feminine virtue are among the corrupt. Some affirm that the lady of the governor was there. At least there were high dames well known to her, and wives of honored husbands, and widows, a great multitude, and ancient maidens, all of excellent repute, and fair young girls who trembled lest their mothers should espy them. And as Brown is called forth by a, quote, figure bearing resemblance to some grave divine of the New England churches, he even thinks he sees his own parents among the revelers. He could have well nigh sworn that the shape of his own dead father beckoned him to advance, looking downward from a smoke wreath, while a woman with dim features of despair threw out her hand to warn him back. Was it his mother? And the dark figure, identified as such, acts as a priest in this assembly, welcoming Brown in an identified, quote, slender form of a veiled female. Again, scrupulously avoiding any direct knowledge of the thing, this Black Sabbath ceremony is then inaugurated by a speech, language, texts, reading from the dark figure that celebrates universal sin as an undeniable and inescapable aspect of human nature, even the most seemingly pious among us. There, resumed the sable form, are all whom ye have reverenced from youth. Ye deem them holier than yourselves and shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with their lives of righteousness and prayerful aspirations heavenward. Yet here are they all in my worshipping assembly. This night it shall be granted you to know their secret deeds, how hoary bearded elders of the church have whispered wanton words to the young maids of their households, how many a woman, eager for widow's weeds, has given her husband a drink at bedtime and let him sleep his last sleep in her bosom. How beardless youths have made haste to inherit their father's wealth, and how fair damsels, blush not, sweet young ones, have dug little graves in the garden, and bidden me the sole guest to an infant's funeral. By the sympathy of your human hearts for sin ye shall send out all these places, whether in church, bedchamber, street, field, or forest, where crime has been committed, and shall exult to behold the whole earth one stain of guilt, one mighty blood spot. Far more than this, it shall be yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin, the fountain of all wicked arts, and which inexhaustibly supplies more evil impulses than human power, than my power at its utmost can make manifest in deeds. And now, my children, look upon each other. This is dark romanticism. This is anti-transcendentalism. It's a rejection of nature as a purifying catalyst of earthly goodness. Everyone always has the stain of evil, the scarlet letter, the black veil, the secret sin. When the children, here Brown and the female figure, but also the readers, follow the direction to look upon one another, by the blaze of the hell-kindled torches, the wretched man beheld his faith, and the wife her husband, trembling before that unhallowed altar. Now, presumably this settles the matter of faith's referent. The wife her husband seems to lack faith into that personalization, and yet the problem of vision is again implicated. All sight at this moment is, quote, by the blaze of the hell-kindled torches. You could say that blaze suggests enough light to see clearly, but that is qualified by the light itself being hell-fired or hell-kindled, and thus suspect. So in this climactic moment, we still don't know what the word faith is supposed to mean. That haunting uncertainty, subtle as it may be, drives readers further along by the seduction of their own curiosity. The figure weighs in again with his interpretation of these events. Depending upon one another's hearts, ye have still hope that virtue were not all a dream. Now are all undeceived. Evil is the nature of mankind. Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children, to the communion of your race. Brown shouts out again with an arguable reference to his own capacity for belief rather than to his wife. Faith! Faith! Cried the husband. Look up to heaven and resist the wicked one. And then everything vanishes. He wakes up back at home and everything's seemingly back to normal. Walking through town, he recoils from the people he'd seen in his dream vision of the night before, questioning their sincerity as they take up the pious appearances they'd always had before. Even when seeing his wife Faith with her pink ribbons, Goodman Brown looked sternly and sadly into her face and passed on without a greeting. Now, the text itself puts the question to readers, which loops them further into the experience and implications of the theme. Had Goodman Brown fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of a witch meeting? And Brown and readers are left wondering, uncertain, if what Brown had seen was material reality or just a faulty appearance of reality. Importantly, though, he is still among this same community. His individual reservations are his private concern, but presumably he still wears the superficial appearance of conformity. Brown's allegorical value then extends this duality to a universal condition of humanity, and it's this same duality, the knowledge that any superficial appearance of good is necessarily infused with evil, that haunts him for the rest of his life. And when he had lived long and was borne to his grave a hoary corpse, followed by Faith, an aged woman, and children and grandchildren, a goodly procession, besides neighbors not a few, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom. So at the end, the variable signifier of faith resolves to her material identity rather than the spiritual abstraction. The physical limitation is emphasized in the consequences of her physicality, her children and grandchildren, and Brown himself is now limited to that same scope, as the abstraction of language on his tombstone is also rejected. That realm of the abstract, the realm of God, is unreachable in this life, rejecting a core tenet of romantic and transcendentalist thought. All that's left in the end is the physical reality and a deep, impenetrable uncertainty about anything beyond our physical apprehension. Our earthly nature, unavoidably drenched with sin, is all we can know for sure. That is dark indeed.